My guest at this time is Chris Hogan. He's a financial expert at DaveRamsey.com. He's also author of the brand new book, Everyday Millionaires. As the partial government shutdown continues, we're hearing more and more stories in the media about federal workers talking about how they're struggling to make ends meet, even putting food on the table as they go nearly 3 weeks now without pay. But it's not just federal workers. Some studies suggest well over half of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck, and many of them also don't have enough money set aside to cover emergency expenses or everyday expenses for very long if their income were to dry up. So what can we learn to make sure we're all in a more stable position if there is a sudden job loss or some other crisis? And Chris, thanks so much for being with us.
Well, thank you, sir. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Well, I'm sure you've seen some of these stories here in the past few days as more attention has been given to the partial shutdown. But given the statistics on saving and non-saving that have been out there for years, how common is it for Americans to be scrambling after not getting paid for just a few weeks?
Well, I mean, you hit the nail on the head as you talk about almost 80% of people are living paycheck to paycheck. And I think it's important for us to really look at this and understand it, that you've got people that are running out of money before the end of the month. And, we have to acknowledge the stress and tension that this can cause on people that are just trying to provide for their families. So I think, it's a tough spot to be in, and I think it requires people really, taking a deep breath and making clear decisions about how they're going to handle things moving forward. And that's tough, and we can talk to that. But I think it also is important for people to understand the importance and the value of remaining in control of our money with budgeting, but also having that emergency fund, 3 to 6 months of expenses tucked aside to help us in times just like these.
And so, as you mentioned, when you have no expectation of this happening, it certainly comes as a jolt. But like you also said, if you're prepared for it, it's not as severe of a blow, at least in the first few months. So let's say you're in this position. You don't have a lot set aside. Assuming the government does reopen at some point, how do you get the ball rolling on getting yourself a solid budget and a good savings plan?
Well, I think the first thing is you have to gain agreement. If you're single, that you decide that it's time to conserve. That means any non-essential spending needs to stop. If you're married, you and your spouse get on the same page and have this agreement. That way you don't add tension on top of an already tense situation. So conserving the resources you have right now is vital. And I'm talking about everything from money to food, all of those areas, we've got to go in conserve mode. And this is where you look at the things that are essential versus non-essential. And as we talk with people, I've said, we talk about the 4 walls. These are the 4 areas that you absolutely have to take care of. And that's having food, that's having shelter, that's having clothing, and having your transportation. So those 4 areas are areas that are absolute musts. Anything that doesn't fall into that category needs to go away. And by that, I'm talking about the landline phone. Or the cable. You got to start to look at ways that we can cut back and be able to save more money.
It seems like millennials are more conscious of this than older generations.
Well, they are. And millennials, though, they have their own area where they like to focus. They're more focused on experiences than they are necessarily material things. And so either way, material things cost money, but so do experiences. And so this is where you should start to think differently. You can be a coffee drinker and buy a $3 or $4 can of coffee or a bag of beans and make coffee at home and not spend $5 at the fancy coffee shop. So right there, we're saving you $150 to $200 a month by not spending and conserving. So I think it's a matter of understanding what you can control versus what you can't. Our mindset, especially, my heart goes out to these government workers that are working hard and doing their job and not getting paid. This is frustrating, and I hope it's something that gets resolved relatively quickly. But for them, it doesn't change that they still have families to take care of. And so if your kids are old enough to understand, have that conversation with them. So if you were used to going out on Friday or Saturday night and eating out, you need to communicate with them so they can understand why you're not doing that right now, what's going on, so they can understand the family dynamic and really begin to understand in their own way.
We're talking with Chris Hogan of DaveRamsey.com, also author of the brand new book, Everyday Millionaires. And Chris, just a moment ago, you were talking about setting up the 4 walls, the food, the clothing, the shelter, the transportation, and pushing off all the extraneous things, or at least as many of them as you can. Where do you go from there?
Well, I think the first thing is you got to learn to live on less. And that's, even in with your budgeting and understanding what it requires for you to live on, we got to start to figure out those things to stop doing immediately. And that means no use of the debit card without communication and understanding what's going on. But also with debt. Debt is the biggest thief of all of our financial futures that's out there. I'm talking about credit cards, student loans, car loans, all these things out there. So now it's a matter of, if you don't have money coming in, how do you deal with that debt? You might have payments on credit cards that are due. And so what I've told people is, look at your budget and figure out if you can send in something. Sending in something is better than doing nothing. You might have a $100 minimum payment due on that credit card, but as you've done your budget and don't have money coming in, if all you're able to do is send them $10 or $20, call them, communicate that with them, and then send in what you can. Now, again, they're not going to like it, but guess what? You're not calling to tell them to like it. You're explaining your situation. Now, if you're somebody that is worried about your credit score, which I don't worry about that. I think a credit score is just an indicator of how much debt you love and how you treat debt, because the FICO score measures how much debt you have, how well you've paid it, the type of debt that you have, and how likely they are to give you more debt. But if you are somebody that's worried about FICO score, then you need to make every minimum payment on every debt that you have. You need to make that decision with your eyes wide open and understanding what it's going to require.
So many different areas to go over here in just a few minutes. But in terms of attacking debt, what are the quick bullet points there? In addition to what you said about sending in even below the minimum payment necessarily, if that's what it takes for a brief period of time, the smartest way that you believe to go after that? We hear a lot of different options out there from a lot of different advertisers, but what's the smart way?
Well, I think the best way to attack debt is, first of all, acknowledge and realize it's not your friend. Debt, anytime you use someone else's money, they charge you interest. And interest that you charge is a penalty. It costs you more money. So understand that debt's not your friend, and let's get serious about it. And that means listing your debts out from smallest to biggest, not biggest to smallest to biggest, because I want you to make minimum payments on all the other debts except for that little one. That little one, I want you to throw every extra dime you have at it. Knock out that $500 credit card and watch what happens. Something in people's psyche changes. They start to believe that they can do this. And getting out of debt's not about math, it's about momentum. So if you believe you can and you're working toward it and you start to make progress, what happens is you get more motivated and more encouraged, and that'll move you down the list. On average, we're seeing people pay off their debts within 18 to 24 months. And so that's someone that's super serious. So make a decision for yourself and then begin to try.
And then once you're either treading water or your head is above water, what's the best way to strategize for that emergency fund that you talked about, long-term savings, kids' college, all that sort of thing? How do you do that in an organized and effective way?
Yeah, well, we talk about that at Ramsey Solutions. I've been a part of Dave's team for 13 years, and we talk about it through Financial Peace University. This is a 9-week course that walks people through the 7 baby steps. And you just hit on that. Baby step 1 is getting $1,000 saved. Baby step 2 is attacking your debt using the debt snowball, smallest to biggest. Baby step 3 is, now that you've gotten yourself out of debt, you've given yourself a raise. So you can begin to build up a fully funded emergency fund, baby step 3, of 3 to 6 months of expenses. Park that in a money market account so it's sitting there if and when you need it. And once you get that in place, now you can begin baby step 4, 5, and 6, which are all done at the same time. Baby step 4 is investing 15% of your household income into retirement, 401ks, 403bs, and Roth IRAs. Baby step 5 is where you start to save toward college. And baby step 6 is where you pay extra and pay off the house. That will lead you to baby step 7, where you're building wealth and you're able to give like you never have before. So following that linear plan will put you on the path that's helped millions of people learn how money works, but also take back control.
Fascinating stuff. And one of the things you learn from this, and I know this is part of your book, I've seen it in a couple other places as well, is that people who are responsible and organized and disciplined in their savings and budgeting can accumulate a tremendous amount of wealth. And oftentimes it's the neighbor you'd least expect, not the guy with the giant house and the giant yard and the really expensive cars in the driveway down the street.
Oh, no, absolutely. And that's what we found as we did the largest study that's ever been done on millionaires with my new book, Everyday Millionaires, How Ordinary People Build Extraordinary Wealth and How You Can Too. We used a research firm to help us coordinate all that research, talked to over 10,000 of them. And what we found is that everyday millionaires aren't the trust fund babies. They aren't people that got lucky. They aren't people that hit the lottery. These are regular, everyday, hardworking men and women that were focused and intentional over time, and they were able to get to millionaire status.
And so even though it looks daunting and overwhelming right now, perhaps, with just the first steps that Chris just explained, it's possible to make progress, and before too long, you can be in a much more secure position. So
you really can. I mean, we've seen this, on average, it's taking these millionaires 25 to 28 years to get there, but they're able to live life, be in the moment, not live for the moment, but also stay focused on reaching financial freedom. So I want people to know it is possible. You just have to get started.
Chris, fantastic advice. Thanks so much for your time today. Good luck with the book.
Thank you, my friend. It's a pleasure to join you.
Thank you, sir. Chris Hogan is a financial expert at DaveRamsey.com. He's also the author of the brand new book, Everyday Millionaires. I'm Greg Columbus reporting for Radio America.